Welcome back to the No Nonsense Sustainability Podcast. I'm Ildiko Almasi-Simsik, and today we're covering what a social impact is. I have with me Andrea Kanaris, who's a social impact professional, founder of All Things Social Impact, best-selling author, and also a podcast host of the All Things Social Impact podcast. Welcome to the show, Andrea.
Absolute pleasure to be here. Thank you.
To kick things off, what is the one lesson you've learned on your entrepreneurial journey in social impact?
Wow, just one. Being a solopreneur is hard. It is so underestimated. You know, we see successful people and we think they make it look so easy. It's hard work and it doesn't stop. There's.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I can identify with that 100%.
Yeah. So I'd say that's the biggest lesson. There's no turning off.
Yeah. So in the show, I have a permanent guest, Bob the Buzzer, who will keep us on track if we enter the world of buzzwords and jargon. That's very easy, especially in social impact. So we're aiming to have these nuanced conversations where we unpack things and break down the complexity. And especially today, talking about something that's such a huge passion project for both of us. I called my book, What is a Social Impact? You started your platform,
Correct.
All Things Social Impact. It's all about that. So after having all these conversations with all these people on your podcast on social impact, I'm going to give you 60 seconds to explain it to me without a buzzword, if that's even possible.
Without a buzzword. Ugh.
Yes.
I would explain a social impact as something that affects people as it relates to either a project, an intervention, or, a policy or a strategy that a government may put out, and it's how it affects the people. And people both at all levels, so people at individual levels, and then also at the group level, community, and then societal level. And it's how it affects them, and it's how it's the degree to which it affects them, and it's also what you can do about it in terms of minimizing that or reducing it, or even better, stopping those impacts from happening at all. And then the other thing is to look for opportunities. How can you make their lives better? Is this project, intervention thing able to provide opportunities that can make their lives better?
Yeah. So basically, social impact is everything or nothing, depending on the context.
Pretty much. Yes. In a lot of ways, yes.
Okay. But clearly, you've had access to some brilliant people on your podcast to explain their context and like their perspectives. What have you observed to be the biggest blind spots or misconceptions that these people have you realized or clear up?
I think the biggest thing in the industry, and I see it both in my personal work and even when I'm talking to, like you say, the guests on my host who are extremely brilliant, is that it's not about you. You know, we're social impact professionals, practitioners, experts. It's got nothing to do with us. It's got nothing to do with us at all. When we go out there, we are nothing. It's not to do with us in any way. Social impact has nothing to do with us. It's not about us. It's not about our values. It's not about our political positions. It's not about how we think about things at all. It's got nothing to do with us in that regard. We are observers, data collectors, analyzers, but the impact of that project has nothing to do with us.
Yeah, no, that's very true. And I think we often forget that we're literally just like this middleman between the affected people and the people who are like managing
100%.
Or creating these projects. And most of us come from some sort of social background, whether that's anthropology, social research, gender studies. But we have this, I think I had this observation, and most of us social specialists are kind of introverted. So we like to observe and collect information. but compared to some other colleagues in other disciplines, we're still a bit more reserved and like more introverted.
I would say that's right, for sure. I mean, it's one of those things that makes us good at our job. We have the empathy, we have a natural ability to sit back and observe and those sorts of things. But those things, like all things, have double-edged swords applied to them.
Yeah.
Some that can harm us, some that can harm the community if you're not on top of them.
Yeah. I mean, clearly you've heard a lot of stories from people about their projects and like some stories from the field. What stories stick with you? Is there any story that made you reconsider your opinions, your roles, your previous ideas about certain things?
Change my mind. The ones that stick with me, I mean, the most recent one is, I guess, I was involved in a judgment where the Independent Planning Commission in New South Wales decision to not approve a project was upheld. And I guess being a part of that as the social impact expert in the court, it did remove that idea that sometimes you get when you've been slugging along for years and years and feeling like the social impacts aren't being considered properly. And to finally be in a time where you're involved in something where you were able to make sure that the decision was based somewhat in the social impacts and that they were seriously considered and that they were a part of the decision-making process in a meaningful way, not in a lip service way, but in an actual meaningful way. And I think that's something that is come late in my career. I think, when you and I probably started off in social impact, it wasn't as mainstream as it is now. It wasn't as well understood. So for me, I guess that's shifted. I've always hoped that it would make a difference in terms of decision makers, but I was a little bit skeptical. And late in the day, I finally found that, well, actually, it has been worth the hard work we've put in over the years. So that's nice.
And I guess that ties back to some of the earlier conversation of how you're proving something, because for a lot of disciplines you have data, you have numbers, you have evidence, and for a lot of this like social works, as you say, it's the perception of the people.
Yeah.
That's not necessarily supported by evidence. I know you can't say a lot about this particular
it's
court
public,
case.
so I can probably say more.
Yeah. Was it the qualitative data? Was it quantitative? What was the turning point?
I actually really love this because I'm a believer that there is more data, and I think a lot of our social professionals have been. I'm a social scientist, so I'm used to working in both quantitative and qualitative data. And I'm a believer that perceptions are important, but only insofar as they are, how should we say, as they are not managed, if you like. But that doesn't necessarily mean because someone perceives something, it's an impact. In this project, I was able to look at the data that had been presented, the things that informed the social impact assessment, review it, look at the data, go to the community, understand the concerns, but not from yes, you want to understand the perceptions, but for me, it was like, is there an actual impact on this community that is social, that affects the community, that affects the society, how they live their lives, where they live their lives, their health, all these kinds of things. And there was data that, yes, there was qualitative data, but there was quantitative data as well, particularly around health. So it was a combination of both, which I think fits true with my understanding of social impact. It's never just the quantitative, it's the qualitative. And, you get the quantitative and it makes you ask more questions. So you kind of need both. And I think that bore out in this decision. There was certainly stuff around transport, around accidents, around health data that it definitely informed the decision.
Yeah, and like often you would think that some of these health and safety or community health and safety, they're under a different department, or if it's like an indirect impact, the company's cars far away, not in the identified communities, causing accidents, then it requires a more multi-dimensional
Yes.
thinking around what a social impact is, right? And how it relates to that operation.
100%. And it was a really interesting little place because it was a little tiny country town in New South Wales, and it was an operation that had been operating for a while, but they were ramping up, and the number of trucks going through a town, and I think trucks is a big one for country towns. And I think for most projects that we work on, anyone who's done not just from the social perspective, but even the environmental side of things, sometimes the amount of trucks going through for noise, from dust, there's these technical reports, and this is the thing that's interesting, right? And it's the thing that I think, if we go back to the blind spots, this could be one of the blind spots too, is that just because a transport study has been done, or a noise study has been done, or a air quality study has been done, your job is to pick it up and go, what does that mean for the community, from their health, from the way they live? And I think there's a lot of people who delineate too much and go, well, that study's been done. And it's like, well, it's been done from a technical perspective, but what does it actually mean as a flow-on effect for people? And this project, actually, the work we did in terms of being able to support the decision made from the IPC was able to pull the data that sort of picked up from these technical studies and say, that's all good and well. So for an example, and this is in there, like I said, these are public, so I can say noise was one that was considered to be, they were within the noise realm. And this is a common one for social impact, right? And how it,
that's why I'm waiting for the...
However, we were able to say, actually, that might be all good and well, but you didn't consider shift workers, vulnerable people. You didn't consider whether somebody had a health condition that made them more sensitive to noise, and they're bucked right up against the community, and they've got trucks coming in and out day and night, like into these hours. So noise, where normally people would say, they're within the acceptable range, we were able to argue that actually, for who? And in fact, there were vulnerable groups, and you didn't do the work, you didn't identify them, so you can't actually say that you are not impacting just because the noise study said that you've hit some kind of threshold.
But is that a flaw of the legislation that required this developer to do this? Is that a flaw of their processes of picking this information up? Was it not integrated with the social? Was there no feedback mechanism?
I would say, on a broader, for this particular case, I would say that the social impact assessment, and this is by no means a reflection on the company that did the social impact assessment, because we all know that there are limitations in terms of funding, in terms of timeframes, in terms of what the client will allow them to do. However, what wasn't done in that study was an unpacking and a proper identification of the vulnerable groups within those studies. And if you haven't got the vulnerable groups, then you can't really assess you can't with confidence say that people aren't negatively impacted or affected in some kind of profound way. The other thing that they didn't do was the baseline data around health. So you can't, which is part of, I guess, identifying the vulnerable groups, but it's beyond just the vulnerable groups. It's also, if you're going to say that health isn't affected, then you've got to have the health data to actually be able to say that, because you've got to be able to actually determine the existing health conditions within the community.
Yeah, but that's the thing. Very often, health impact assessment is treated separately, so it's not in the scope of the social. Or, they just, let's do an ESIA. And if it's not in the scope,
it's interesting because this is probably where this helped me. I have a background also in public health. So I worked in public health department. And so I have a little bit of knowledge and background in health and health data and the likes, and health service planning. So that actually helped me. And in social impact, in all the guidelines, both from the IAIA all the way down to, the Queensland and New South Wales guidelines here in Australia, and I'd say probably in other jurisdictions as well, part of it is health and social impact, health and well-being. So you cannot assess health and well-being without having the health data and without understanding public health, because you're talking about, the public health of the community. So my understanding of that probably did position me in a way to be able to assist in that particular issue, where I was able to see a gap in the data and in the identification of vulnerable groups, which probably did assist in that regard. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you're in a unique position there, because most of us don't have that background or have that understanding, and maybe we pick it up as we go. Maybe we flag the need to bring in other experts, but like that's not part of the job requirements, right? And that's something that I really enjoyed about your early episodes on all things social impact, when you got these early career people to talk about their experiences, like what is the skill set you need? How do you find a job? Now it's such a vast job market. You could literally work for any company doing almost anything. So how did you come up with this idea to interview these early career people?
I mean, in a lot of ways, my business, my book, my business, the podcast was somewhat inspired by early career people, in the sense that when I was working for EMM Consulting and I established their social impact and performance team, they didn't have one, and they were, they read the tea leaves of what was coming, and they knew that they needed a social impact team. And so I came on board, I built that. And because there wasn't anybody in the organization who was social impact practitioner other than me, I needed help. So I went to the University of Queensland, which was where I had studied social science, because I knew that they taught social impact. So I knew that if I got students from UQ, that they would have a degree of understanding of at least what social impact kind of was, or what it might be. That didn't bear out to be as true as I thought it was. A lot of them had a lot of questions about what it actually was, but at least they've been exposed to some degree in their course. But because I had a whole team of like graduates to build it, all their questions of me and what they needed, and observing them struggle, but also what they were teaching me, that symbiotic relationship between the experienced person learning, they think they're learning from me, and I'm like, I'm learning from them. I'm learning my blind spots. I'm learning more contemporary thoughts around things, keeping my finger on the pulse, so to speak, through the younger ones. But, the things they ask me about, how to apply the theory into practice. So what struck me was that here we had these extremely intelligent, high-performing young professionals coming into an area, understanding the theory perfectly well, but then we're like, but what does it mean on the ground? How do I actually do this? How do I actually apply it on the ground? So that was an eye-opener too, because after a while we get so used to doing it, we kind of forget that we had those questions when we first started as well, So that inspired me when one of the things they asked me sort of before I left EMN, they were pushing me for, and I did run for them some training course, and we were putting together a kind of practice manual for them, right? So that they could go to that and use it as a resource. And so that sort of underpins a lot of what I'm doing now. Certainly inspired it.
Okay. And in terms of their education, was it the social impact assessment specifically, or was that just related to something social? Because now I found out that you can study social impact assessment specifically, and I'm not sure if that's like an advantage or a constraint, because for us, I had my bachelor's is in social policy, but I had studied social psychology, research methods, quantitative research methods, qualitative methods, like socioeconomics, political sociology. Like I had exposure to a lot of different things, including fieldwork. And I feel like a lot of that positively contributed to my career development as I applied this concept of social impact assessment. But I had an overview that was broader than that.
Likewise, I was the same. My bachelor's was in social science, and it was basically all of the social sciences like sociology, anthropology, social anthropology, all of those psychology and the whole lot, the whole gamut. And you went through, you did them all, and you did the social research, quantitative, qualitative, data analysis, demography, and some planning courses as well. So that was my undergraduate. Then I did the Masters of Social Planning and Development at UQ, which is where the social impact assessment was taught, at least in the course that I did. And UQ back then were the only ones that I was aware of in Australia that actually taught social impact assessment. Now that's changed.
Okay.
Now there are other who teach just social impact assessment. And like you, I find that a bit perplexing because taken outside of the context of the social sciences broadly, I don't know how you navigate it because it's just a process. Social impact assessment, social impact is one thing, but social impact assessment is a very specific niche thing. It is a process of applied research to the planning process, or at least that's how I've always been taught it, and that's how I approach it. So I often wonder, like, if you're sitting in business or you're sitting in communications and you're learning social impact assessment process, and I'm wondering, well, how do you understand the human behavioral and societal factors that drive people or that influence people or that will inform your decision making? Or how do you even do this research actually, or understand how to do the research? And
yeah, exactly. When you're let out into the real world. So when you started working with these people, what were sort of their biggest questions or their biggest, like, the gaps in their knowledge that made them less effective in the real world?
I was lucky. These were extremely bright, and they had social science background, mostly. I think all of them actually, and they had some exposure to having done the social impact course, or at least they were in the process of doing it. What I would say was their limitations was that things like, how do you scope an SIA? What did some of these terms?
Okay.
Oh no!
What is the scoping? What is the scoping?
It's how you determine how far your social impact should go, who's going to be affected, how they're affected, how am I going to, what methods am I going to use, what approaches am I going to adopt to do my piece of research on finding out, how am I going to find out how far away from the site do I have to go from the project site, for example, if we're doing a big project, let's say we're doing a wind farm, and I'm going, well, how far away from those turbines do I have to go before I'm comfortable to say I understand the impacts on people? Do I have to consider the construction phase? Do I have to consider the transport routes, and how far, again, along that transport route do I have to go? Making all those decisions around those sorts of things, I don't think is very well taught. And I don't know, sometimes some of that teaching is an on-the-ground thing anyway. So I don't know how you teach it in university, because it would still remain a very theoretical thing. So that's what I identified, even areas where they were taught theories. So, and for example, let's say, okay, here's a perfect, and we're going to get into the jargon, so I'm going to make it distributive justice, or intergenerational equity. Let's just go for it.
I'm not gonna push every time.
But to make the point of what you're saying of why you don't want the jargon is because they're taught what they mean, which is really great that we have these theories and that we have people who dedicate their time to understanding these concepts and teaching these concepts. When I go to the field, nobody ever says distributive justice to me. And if I said it to them, they would look at me like I was crazy. Like, what are you talking about? They get confused, they get disengaged. I would lose them in terms of being able to have a relationship with them, because I would create this kind of distance, because language is important. And if I start talking in a way that they don't understand, then they may interpret that as, oh, she thinks she's better than us. She thinks we're stupid, or less important than her. Like, these are all the kinds of misunderstandings that can happen if you're going in with this kind of highly academic language. So it's one thing to understand those, but then it's what do they mean when you're on the ground, like you say, in the field, and you need to have the kind of data and information that will allow you to use those concepts in your analysis or whatever, but you've got to know what they mean to people on the ground and what's the data and the questions you need to ask and how you ask them and how do you structure that conversation with your communities to get that information from them. That's
exactly.
the biggest difference.
Exactly.
Yeah, I would say.
And then based on these observations and your interactions with these early career fresh graduates, you came up with the idea of the All Things Social Impact platform. That is, my understanding is it's a collection of tools, access to forums, conversations, mentoring, and like everything that these people might need. But then could you explain what kind of tools are there? How are these conversations different from the LinkedIn groups that were mentioned in some of your podcast episodes that serve as a source of information for early career people?
Yeah, I would think it's a couple of things. It's a bit of a one place for a start that everything's housed in. It's not a case of you have to go remembering where you found something or where you had a conversation with somebody. So that's one thing that gets alleviated. There are learner videos. So what I've done is I've broken down the social impact assessment process, and at each point, including how to write a proposal, because clients come to you and said, I want a social impact assessment. Can you do it? Right? How do you write that? And how do you position yourself? How do you cost it? How do you scope it?
No, that's a really good point, because business is not something they teach in the social science.
We're not taught that.
School.
That's not for us, apparently. Yeah. So we're not taught that. We're taught so there's definitely that breaking down of how to understand it, how to think about it, what needs to go there, and how to write it in a way that's a winning fee proposal. Because you don't want to just write one, you want to write a good one that's going to position yourself. So how do you do that? And no one teaches you that. You figure it out, you fumble your way through, because a lot of social impact professionals end up writing fee proposals. Now, whether we're doing it for the private sector because we're consultants, or whether we're working for a not-for-profit and we need funding because we need to get our funding, that's the other place it happens, right? But you need to know how to articulate that and how to prepare it in a way that is compelling to the person who's reading it.
That's very true. I remember the first time when a client asked me to cost an ESAP, and I had no idea. Some of the items, I had no idea.
None. And I think most of us are sitting in that position, and we're reliant upon our supervisor or someone in there where we're working to help us out. The reality is, and particularly even more so now for this younger generation, and we're on the other side of COVID, where all of a sudden everyone's working from home. The privileges that I had and the things that you and I and people of our generation had the privilege of was going into an office and being surrounded by experienced people that we didn't even have to necessarily ask a question, because we'll be in a meeting with them, or we'll be in the same room and be able to overhear them having a telephone call or a discussion with someone near the water cooler or in the lunchroom as they're getting their tea or coffee. We might run into them, and we run into them and we build a rapport with them. And that's where I got some of my best mentors in the early days who would sort of see your enthusiasm or whatever. I know your story is a great one, but mine would be tap you on the shoulder and say, look, this is a high level meeting, but come along so that you can learn, and just sit there and listen and take notes and have
or just have a lunch. Okay, come join us for the lunch and we'll discuss. That was this very informal environment where I was not afraid to ask questions. Now in the online world, you have to request a meeting, show up, and it's a lot more formal than it used to be, that's for sure.
So I guess the whole COVID and the shift in these sorts of things, and listening to people, because I do a lot of mentoring programs with the university and other areas, I find that there's a thirst for exactly that. They're working to a supervisor who may or may not be in the office when they are. The deadline's coming, but their supervisor's in a meeting or unavailable, but they need to get this deliverable kind of now. So how do you do that when you're not in an office?
Yeah.
So that's not like there's somebody else in your team, or, you know, maybe they're on a call, and it's a lot harder to connect with people. We're kind of more disconnected than we used to be. So the portal for me kind of made sense. It kind of evolved from this as I was thinking about the problem. It was like, what if there was somewhere that people could go where you could be their supervisor? So there's a whole heap of learner videos that are broken down, and it's not structured like your traditional course where you go from point A to point B and you get a certificate at the end of it. It's more like, I've got some strengths. I might have some things that I'm really comfortable with and I feel confident that I can get on with it. But I might have something that I haven't come across before and I could do with somebody who could really help me, give me some tips. So the learner videos kind of walk people through at this point. They're 5 minutes to 10-minute videos or 15-minute videos that just talk people about the things you need to consider. But of course, not everyone's, you know, visual or audible. So there's also guidance document that just for that particular task, here's a guidance document of the things that you need to do to step you through, that points you in the right direction of things that you might want to do. And to accompany that is like, hey, there's also, you may want some templates. If you don't have a template, if you're not sure how it should be structured, then here's some template. Here's a checklist to make sure that you've done all the things that are needed to complete that section of the work, right?
Exactly. That's like so useful, because I know like a lot of the times you're going on the intranet and you're trying to, or you're the SharePoint now, and you try to find an old project that you could use as a template, but you don't even know if it's the most appropriate one, or which are the sections that are a must, or which are the sections that could be removed if they're not like appropriate for the project, especially if you're in that first 5 years of your career when you're often doing most of the heavy lifting without much support or preparation. And even if there's support, like I remember I've had amazing mentors the first 5 years of my career, but sometimes I still didn't understand what they're asking, or their guidance just made no sense because I was like not there to just get what they mean. Like, let's just do a scope of works like, for this or that.
What's the scope
and I was like, yeah, exactly. Let's start. What is this abbreviation? Start with the basics.
But
it's very true. And it's very true. Like the templates and, you know, the whole idea of, having like template stores, like that's how my company ENS Solutions like started. I came up with this idea that if only we had some templates and like checklists or bullet points, like what is it I need to add? And it's not, I've always felt like it's not that it's taking away from my value as an expert. It just helps me organize my thoughts. Because if I'm working on a project, I have like 1,000 things to keep in mind. And if only I have a little guidance on some bullet points that help me populate this section so I don't forget anything,
if I don't have to
huge.
Reinvent the wheel every time I do a social impact assessment or get involved in an ESHA, or perhaps I'm preparing a social impact management plan. But wouldn't it be nice if I didn't have to start from scratch every single time, you know, or deal with battling with, as you pointed out, SharePoint or some version of SharePoint, right? and someone else's filing system that I don't understand, right? And hoping that someone bothered to file it because maybe it's sitting on their desktop. And, you know, and that's not to criticize people. People get busy, and when people are stressed and they're busy and they're under the pump, it's the things like filing that go astray. It's things like the debrief on a project that leads to a project, you know, case study that may be able to help you, because they don't get done, not because people doesn't have a desire to, but because people didn't get around to it. So, you know, having a portal that allows people to go in there and go, well, there's examples, there's project examples, there's learner studies, there's even a forum where I can go to like-minded people and go, well, what was your experience on that? My blog's on there, so they have access to me as well. By being a member of it, they'll have access to me. So the aim is that we're going to be having every couple of months, there's going to be a online forum where they'll be able to ask me questions. But in between, they can talk with each other and build their relationships, learn from each other. So they're not learning from just me and my experience. The whole idea is that they're learning from each other as well, which is part of the whole YouTube channel as well.
Yeah.
It's like, you can hear from me every week, but wouldn't it be nice if you could hear from a wide range of people who,
from others,
exactly like what you're doing, like bringing on a wide range of people with diverse experiences, diverse backgrounds, who entered into social impact in different ways, but also have different conceptualizations of what social impact is. And that's the other thing I'm learning from the YouTube channel. People do think of impact as different, but the reason I called it All Things Social Impact, and if anyone's watched my channel, there's the Paul Cranch, and there's a couple of my guests who are not social impact practitioners per se. They're not like what you and I would be. They've worked in local government. They worked in various locations where the work that they do definitely has a social impact, and they certainly understand what you and I would understand as social impact and how to go about it and how to deliver, deliver solutions to communities and help them have better opportunities. So, for example, Paul Cranch, he was involved in the relocation of Grantham, like a town that was damaged through the floods. If that's not social impact, I don't know what is.
Yeah, no, exactly. And so how does your book fit in with that? I know that's like a practical guidance. So it's for anyone who wants to learn about social impact, how to do
it's actually
impact assessments.
On social impact assessment, right? So a bit like,
okay,
I suppose it's very complementary to the portal and the way it's set up and the learner videos and the way it's structured. It goes through a social impact assessment from beginning to end, including from, hey, I've got a project that I want you to deliver. Can you give me a fee proposal? Right through to then, okay, you win it. Great. You've done a great fee proposal, but now you got to deliver on that, right? How do you set up, and this is another thing I don't think always gets taught to social scientists, is how do you, maybe some who have gone on to do research, maybe, but how do you manage your study? Right? And how do you manage a study, not just a study, but in the context of a multidisciplinary team? So you've got to manage your study, but there's a bigger project manager that you may have to interact with, and you're going to have to sort of make sure that you're managing your study, but you're also in interaction with project manager. Now, we're not taught that at university. Like, I know I wasn't taught that at university.
Yeah, you learn that
as you go along,
with practice.
Right? So, and
hard way.
Yeah, and I guess my idea is that I wouldn't want somebody to have to go through the do it the hard way. Why can't I just share my knowledge and experience with somebody? Hence the book. So it does follow it through, and there are certain bits of it that are more detailed, because I know that they're going to be the areas that are more tricky. They take more time. So things like triangulation of data is in there. Things like
that's
so basically making sure that you're not relying on just one data set, that you're relying on multiple data sets, and you're checking them against each other to make sure that they're valid in some way, that they actually are saying what you think they're saying, and also to actually do the risk assessment stuff. I mean, that's hard, and making it's challenging,
really
and it's not an easy process, and it's something that that doesn't get enough attention, I think, in terms of information out there to help people through it. And I know, like, going back to one of your questions, that was the other area that a lot of the newbies struggle with at first. What makes something not just a social impact, but important enough to make it into the report? How do you determine that?
Yeah. And a lot of the times it comes with the experience. But I know I'm developing these AI tools with my other company. And when we're brainstorming, they're often asking me, how do I know that's the correct answer? How do I know that there's a risk? How do I know that that's compliant? Like, what is the thought process, the information, the evidence that I use? And very often I'm just sitting there like, I just know.
So I guess one of the things I do, and by following the process of the methodology, which is the way the book does it, there's a roadmap at the beginning and it follows that roadmap through, is that it allows people to go, by the time you get the risk assessment, you've been collecting that. And that's that intuition you're talking about. Not just because but because you've been listening to the community, you've been knee deep or neck deep in the baseline data, and then in the consultation engagement data, and then the field study that you did, and you've been in that data, and you've been talking to people, and you've been talking to the client, and all these players and all the other technical experts in all these other areas. So you've got all this knowledge that you've been accumulating, and it's rolling up till you get to the risk assessment. I guess what I try and do is to give them an approach that helps them to sift through that stuff, so that it's not just saying that it does exactly what you say, that here is a template that allows you to collect that stuff as you go, so that when you get in there, you go, oh, that's right. The evidence for that is here and here. So it's encouraging them to be organized from the beginning, to say, don't wait until you get to the risk assessment. Have this spreadsheet or this template or whatever you're doing that allows you to keep yourself organized, so that when it's related to risk, you can go, okay, there's data for this in this part and over here, and how do they relate to each other? And not just that, but having a risk workshop, and who needs to be in that risk workshop. And more to the point, which I love what you brought up, because I always encourage this, is like, you need someone in there who wasn't neck deep in the field study and talking to all the potentially impacted stakeholders, or community members, or whoever they may be, or even maybe the client. You want someone who's a bit more objective to sit in that room, who can test your assumptions. Yeah, are you sure? Why are you saying that? You're saying it's high, very high. Why are you saying that? Because it seems to me maybe that it's not that higher risk. Because whether we like it or not, we're human. And when you're hearing people telling you, it's easy to start to empathize with them. And empathy is a great thing for building relationships, but it's not very good for being, when you're being empathetic, there's the wrong side of your brain that's being engaged. That's your emotional side, which is fantastic for connecting with your communities, with the people who might be affected, and to building rapport with them. It's not so great when it comes to being able to look for the logical solutions. You need that other side of your brain. So you need to be able to switch from both. And having someone who was removed from it can help you bring you out of that and into another side of your brain, to sort of look objectively and sit back and go, am I overstating that? Or you can and sometimes you go, no, I've thought about it. You've made me think about it. And actually, no, I'm not overstating it. It really is. and sometimes it makes you go, actually, yeah, you're right. Maybe I am being a little bit overstating in that. And sometimes it's understating. We can understate things as well. So having that objective person there, and having a model and a framework, or whatever you want to call it, that allows you to help them to say, this is how I might conduct this in a way that gives a bit of rigor to my research. And I think that's particularly useful for people like you pointed out, that maybe didn't learn the social sciences, right?
Yeah, no, exactly. And, I don't think having tools, whether it's a checklist, a roadmap, or a template, I don't think it's taking anything away from the expert, or makes them any less of an expert. If anything, it just makes them organized. It just makes them prepared for the next stage of the project, for the next stage of delivering the information and doing the assessments. And, very often we have limited time on the field. So we have sometimes 3 days to collect all the information we will ever need or ever get. And you need to plan. And that comes with understanding what's the deliverable, what will need to go in there, so I can go prepared and maximize my time and come home with all the information I would need. So yeah, I think even I will benefit from reading.
I actually
this
love
book.
that, because I mean that's at the root of why I did it, and I find that you're exactly right. It doesn't take away from being an expert, and what it really does is, and I hope that this book does, and that's the intent of this book, is that we are put limitations on us, as you alluded to, right? Maybe we don't have what is adequate time. And this is, again, that theory versus practice. In theory, we should be able to do this really lovely social impact assessment. We're going to have heaps of time, and we're going to talk to everybody, and we're going to have a wonderful sample size, and it's all going to be wonderful. And what actually happens is that you can't get the sample size that you want. You might not be able to get all the data that you need. You might have timeframes that are a little bit pushed and unrealistic. So how do you build rigor in, and how do you better use the time that you do have to get the best possible data set that you can? And it's exactly like you said, it's good planning.
Yeah, I think that's the perfect takeaway for this episode. Project management, learning about business and budgeting and finance, even if you work with social impact.
All the things that you didn't sign up for. Yes.
Exactly. Thank you, Andrea, for being here with me today and for talking about your podcast, your platform, and your book. I'm really excited to see how it's unfolding in the next couple months. And yeah, I'm sure we will be back to discuss some more at a later stage.
Most definitely. Thank you for having me. It's been lovely talking to you again, Ildiko. So thank you.
So this was it today about social impact and what it means to be a social impact practitioner in practice. Thank you for being here with us today, and we'll be back with some more next time.